And as we were speaking, I heard like a roaring sort of like engine outside the window. And when we looked outside the window, it was like this nice like Maserati, and he was driving out. So I was like, nah, I'm not letting this go. So I ran out of the classroom, ran through the corridor, down the stairs, ran through like the reception. The receptionists were looking at me, so I nearly got in trouble. Ran outside, and then he was sort of like leaving, and I jumped in front of his car. And it was just something in a moment. I was like, no, I'm not letting this guy go.
And on this week's episode, I'm blessed to be joined by the one and only Jeremiah Emmanuel. Jeremiah,
Thank you.
Jeremiah is an entrepreneur, a philanthropist, and a public speaker. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
So as we've been discussing for the last 5 minutes, my mind is blown when I look at your LinkedIn.
No, I appreciate it.
You know, I know that LinkedIn is only the tip of the iceberg for your whole journey, but am I right in saying you started community work at 4 years old?
Yeah, I was like this little minion who sort of tagged along with his mother. So essentially my mother was a youth worker back in the day. And we were sort of just around her, me and my two other siblings. And that sort of instilled in me community from a young age. We got involved in something called the Nelson Mandela School Foundation. It was a campaign to build a school in Nelson Mandela's name in Branson. Mm-hmm. So all in all, the school wasn't built, but we were sort of campaigning essentially for like an academy school to be built in Branson, because so many kids had to sort of like travel super far out in order to get into sort of like good schools. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it was actually hands-on. They got like the kids involved in the campaign. You know, we were writing to local MPs. We were lobbying in Parliament. We were on campaign videos on TV. So that just being the foundation really set me up for everything else that I got into in the future.
Wow, I mean, it's incredible. And I think one of the things which like really amazes me about your journey, from what I understand, is, you know, for a lot of entrepreneurs, they start with, well, I love building things, like making things happen, and that's the starting point.
Yeah.
And I think in later life, they discover purpose and you know, what they feel their calling might be.
Yeah.
But to me, it seems like it was actually the other way around. Like, you know, you found your calling, you found that passion. But at that age, you know, we're all children are narcissists, right? Everything's about us and everything's about me. That's the reality of being a child, right? So how come that landed so much with you? How come that stayed with you throughout?
I think my brain was wired to helping other people. So again, in terms of purpose, and even if I was to ask myself, what is my purpose? I believe my purpose is to help people around me, to help the world around me. And it was something my mom always used to say to me, you know, help other people, whether or not they're more or less fortunate than yourself. You know, growing up, I wasn't privileged. I didn't come from a two-parent household. My father passed away when I was quite young, and we sort of lived within poverty. Like, literally, my family was a term that is called hidden homeless. So between the age of about 4 till I was about 11 or 12, I had moved about 7 different times.
Wow.
So I didn't even have a permanent place. So as a kid, I'm thinking I'm the most privileged person in the world. Like, I've just moved into another house within 6 months. This house is a bit bigger than the other one. We moved to another one. Oh, we're in a new area. But I was super desensitized to what exactly was going on. And I feel what got me and my family through that period is how courageous I would say my mom was, that, you know, we were facing such a situation, but she never you know, gave up. She always had a smile, and she was always about helping other people. And I'm sure, you know, along the years, all of the people that my mum has maybe impacted, some of them probably didn't even know what our family was sort of going through at the time.
Yeah, I mean, that's incredible. And I think, again, you know, to have that level of awareness as a kid is unbelievable. And I think, you know, it's for many people in life, like, it's, okay, well, actually, how can I help myself first? And that's got to be the priority. And then once I've sorted myself out, then I'm going to get to other people. And is that something which, again, you know, even in those tough moments, that's just always been your way of thinking about things?
Yeah, 1,000,000%. I think it definitely has its pros and cons. You know, at times, I forgot to sort of like prioritize myself. I think now where I'm currently at within life, I definitely put myself first, both in my physical health, my mental health, my spiritual health. Like, I've just felt that it's super, super important. I maybe didn't see it back then, but at least, moving forward, I sort of have that understanding now. But I'm grateful. I've had some incredible experiences. I've met so many people. I've met so many people. Like, I often bump into people, I might not recognize them, and then they remind me of something from years ago, even more than 10 years ago. So I guess that's part of the pros. But yeah, helping people is super important. But I feel at times, in order to be in the best position to help other people, you need to be in the best position for yourself.
Super interesting. And I think what you're alluding to with that mind, body and soul health as well, I think is so important. And the more and more I get to know people and see people who have had amazing impact, it's clear that they have to carve out that level of respect for keeping all of that.
1,000,000%. Totally.
Super interesting to hear that you mentioned sort of spiritual health there. What does that spiritual journey look like for you? Because for a lot of people, and for myself included, it was almost like spiritual awakening had to come before trying to help others. Like, that was a big part of it, is realizing, helping others, because I'm not going to claim to have been that person from day one at all. How did that look for you?
So I grew up in a Christian household. However, when I really came to terms with it, I had to sort of like question, my relationship with it all. So like right now, I'm in the middle of something called 75 Hard.
Oh yeah, okay.
I'm sure you've heard of it. Literally one indoor workout, one outdoor workout. No junk food, no cheat meals, no alcohol. You had to read 10 pages of a self-development book.
How many days in are you right now?
I'm day 30.
Okay.
So I literally didn't tell anyone, just in case, I failed and I had to start from the beginning. But part of it, I actually decided to just read the Bible. Nice. Because even though, I grew up within that sort of household, I actually realized, like, what do I actually know? Like, I've never read the Bible in that way. So I think for me, whether someone, like religion, I sort of don't go into it a lot with a lot of people. I believe everyone can have their own beliefs.
Sure.
But at the end of the day, for me, it was like, this is something I've been around for my whole entire life. Let me actually delve into it a bit more. I think beyond that, sort of just meditation, making sure that I'm in a quiet space. And I think what's super important is sort of projecting where you want to go into the future. I think I'd done it a lot when I was a lot younger. I would sort of like write down ideas and do all of that. And I sort of lost it along the way. Now I sort of make sure I write everything down, not on a laptop or a phone. I believe there's power in actually using your hands and writing with a pen. It sort of never leaves you. So, it's been sort of just manifesting things that I want to do in the future and the success that I want to sort of like come.
Wow, incredible. And from where I, see things, genuinely, I think that the people who I know who have been able to really harness that manifesting power of the universe is people who are helping others. Yeah. And I genuinely think, I know I don't want to sound, too much on a tangent here, but I genuinely see that when you have a relationship with the universe, which is, take to give, it's amazing, like, what happens in that circle, right? In that cycle of if you're giving back, the universe will give to you to continue giving back. And I think it's one of the most beautiful ways the universe works.
1,000,000%. And yeah, I'm still learning every single day. But what we were saying about mind, body and soul, it's important to have that balance. I think I definitely neglected body. No, to be fair, I neglected all of it. Yeah. When you're sort of like doing business and you're super busy and 100%. Stuff, you often forget it. So for me, it was like, cool, let me get my body right. Let me get my mind right. But also actually putting the same amount of work into all three. I feel a lot of people feel, cool, I'll get my mind right by maybe not being on my phone for certain times, or I'll get my body right by going to the gym twice a week. But you actually have to put like the same amount of work into all of those 3 areas to actually see like a positive effect, I believe anyway.
I completely agree. I mean, until 24, 25, I just saw myself as a mind. You know, I completely neglected the other things.
Yeah.
And again, getting so busy, founding businesses, you know how it is. But I couldn't agree more. And, you know, we could go down that rabbit hole for a long time. So I'm going to pull us back for a second. So going back to the start of the journey, one of the youngest ever BEMs, tell us about that and explain what that is for people who might not know.
So in 2017, I became the youngest person from an ethnic minority to be awarded in the New Year's Honours List.
Amazing.
Thank you so much. So for those who don't know, there's 2 lists that sort of come out every single year, and it's awarded by the monarch. And it sort of starts at BEM, which stands for Medalist of the Order of the British Empire, and then it sort of goes up to like MBE, OBE, CBE, and the rest. So that was an incredible, opportunity for me. There was a lot of debates around it, and the connotations of the empire and stuff like that. But the way I really saw it, I remember I was in studio with Tyne Temper. He's like a really close mentor of mine and someone who's like supported everything that I do. And I received a call from my mum sort of saying, there's, you need to come home. There's like an important letter. And then I was like, letter from who? She said the government. So I was thinking, what the hell is going on?
What trouble am I in, right? That'd be my gut reaction, yeah.
So I remember I went home, and what happens is you normally get, in my case, a letter from the Prime Minister, from the head of the civil service, saying that the Prime Minister or whoever that individual is would like to put your name forward for the honours list. So when I sort of read it, I was like, what? I was sort of confused. I was even thinking, who nominated me?
Yeah.
But it was something I felt was important because, again, the environment I grew up in, I grew up in Branson, South London, and I felt like I was literally dreaming within a nightmare. And that actually became the title of my memoir that I released. And, I sort of grew up in a place where we were limited in our view of the world around us. We were sort of confined to a particular sort of space. And that limited, how we felt we had potential, how we felt we could move into the future. Like, it was a really sort of scary environment. And at the same time, I was like super desensitized, the same as my friends. But for me, it was like, if I can, accept this opportunity and show everyone else in my community that something like this is possible, then it will definitely inspire people like me to obviously understand that they can achieve whatever they want to.
Wow, amazing. And, when you're in that environment where, you're not being shown clearly what is, possible, what allowed you to have the, mentality to say, no, there's so much more and I can get it? What facilitate, in the same way that you're trying to facilitate others and doing a great job of that, what allowed you to see things that way?
So I think to give context, I started on that early campaign with my mom for about 4 years. And then following that, when I was 11, I went into something called the UK Youth Parliament, which is a national organisation, non-partisan, that sort of allows individual young people to represent their communities. That was an incredible experience. You sort of like take over the House of Commons once a year in a televised debate, shadow your local MP, like, it's incredible. So I done that. I then became the young mayor of Lambeth, the borough that I'm from, and then following that, I set up like my first sort of like project and organisation. So I would say, as I was going on my journey, I started having sort of small entries into another world that I didn't know existed beforehand. And again, going back to that title of my book, Dreaming in the Nightmare, a story within the book is the bus 345, the bus route 345. So it starts in Peckham, it ends in South Kensington. And I remember the first time I stepped on that bus route, I get on that Brixton, it passes through sort of like Clapham. You know, Brixton is Brixton, or Brixton back then was Brixton back then.
Brixton now
It's
is very
changed.
different, yeah.
It's very different. But Brixton back then was Brixton back then. Then you sort of get into Clapham. It's like half Brixton, but half different. And then you go from Clapham, you cross into Chelsea.
Yeah.
You go from Chelsea into South Kensington. And then I remember just viewing the stark contrast. You know, in my area, there's litter on the floor. There's graffiti everywhere. And it just looked dirty. But by the time I went to South Kensington for the first time, like, it was almost like the streets were paved with gold. Like, there was no litter. The pavement was, like, completely clean. I'm seeing cars that I only ever saw in Fast and Furious. I'm seeing houses that I actually started calling Doctor Who houses, because from the outside, they just look like normal houses. But when you actually peek into some of the windows, you see just how vast and massive they are. So it was a completely different world. So going back to your initial question, I feel, for me, I was lucky enough to have, you know, certain peaks into that other world as I was growing up. And I would say that sort of drove me to want to break down this wall of silence that sort of separated the two worlds. Because again, you know, there's little areas in the UK, in London especially, where you can walk from one area that is completely poverty-stricken and then walk for about a minute, and then you're in a place where all of the houses are valued at like $1 million, $2 million plus. We saw a lot of that around Grenfell, where, you know, you actually realise the difference in communities and how close they were together. So for me, it was just like, how can I break down that wall? And I think, to even summarise, when I was growing up, I realised that young people from my environment only meet people from a middle class or upper class background in 3 scenarios. The first scenario, you know, they go to a Russell Group university. You know, some people from my area have also been fortunate to go to Oxbridge. So, you know, when they sort of mix in those environments, they meet different people. The second is, you know, some go uni or they don't, but they end up in the city, or they end up in sort of like a professional sort of like role. The third is a young person in the dock in a courtroom speaking to the judge for the first time. And that's the first time ever in their whole entire lives they've met someone from a completely different background to themselves.
Wow.
So when you actually put that into context, you know, a lot of people just don't meet other people, and it's a variety of different factors. You could say it's inequality, you could say it's the society that we live in. You could also say that, you know, certain people haven't, you know, tried to chase opportunities. But for me, that was like the most shocking thing, where I realized, you know, I'm meeting these people, they're not from where I'm from, they're human beings just like me. So why hasn't anyone else sort of like connected or crossed paths, if that sort of makes sense?
Yeah, completely. I mean, it's amazing to hear that side of things. And one thing which I find really interesting is that idea of like peaks into another part of society, and like realizing there's something else, and that, okay, how do we tame this? How do we make this happen? And I think obviously now with social media the way it is, obviously, I think people from lots of different backgrounds see a different part of life than what they would traditionally have been exposed to on their front door. For many, many people, especially with, you know, Instagram, TikTok, all these things showing the most lavish and like the most luxurious lifestyles, which a lot of people would argue isn't even reality. But with most peaks into that part of society now happening through social, where there are lots of shortcuts given to people, and sometimes, you know, riskier ways of trying to make money and do those things. How do you how do you think people are able to avoid going down the path of trying to get, you know, shortcuts and go down the best and most healthy, most productive way to get those things?
So to be fair, social media doesn't really help, does it? You know, there's so many things that people see that make them feel it's easy to sort of get there in life. You've got gurus saying, you know, do this, I'm going to give you my life that I currently have. Like, it just doesn't help. I think it's important to understand that hard work is needed in order to get to a particular place in life. But the way I see it is even sort of like working smarter. I think that's super important to sort of recognize. But again, on my journey, if I'm relating it to myself, I think I had to realize that I couldn't just sit and wait for opportunities to be presented to me. And I feel there's sort of a conception that at times there may be a lack of opportunities. And sometimes I think that's correct. You know, growing up where I grew up, you know, there were certain opportunities that my friends that went to Eton or they went to Harrow, there's definitely opportunities they received that I never received. But at the same time, if you don't put yourself in a place that actually enables you to be presented to these opportunities, then opportunities will never come. And relating it back to what anyone may be doing, you know, I come across a lot of people that say they want to get into public speaking, they want to get into entrepreneurship, but I haven't seen anything on that social media around them working within that area. Like, there's nothing about you doing it online. You know, there's easy steps that you can take to actually get to the positions that you want to get into. But if that's not being seen, then how can you expect for there to be any opportunities, if that sort of makes sense?
Yeah, completely. You got to put yourself out there in order for things to come to you. You
Million
it's the tree falling in the woods,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
No
yeah.
one's around. Super interesting. And you mentioned your book earlier, Dreaming a Nightmare. Was super interesting reading a bit and listening a bit about your, your journey of writing that book and obviously that being a difficult process.
Yeah.
Talk us through that a little bit, because I think it's such a brave thing at a young age to be able to say, I'm going to put everything out there in this way, obviously in the hope of helping people and showing other people what's possible, but just take us through that process.
So, taking it a couple of years back, I remember saying to a careers advisor that I wanted to become an author, and I was told, Jeremiah, don't be too overambitious. And I remember hearing that and even thinking back to that, and not saying that necessarily instilled a fire in me to want to become an author, but it was almost just something that solidified the fact that, growing up where I grew up, if you had certain aspirations, it was just seen as impossible. It's sort of seen as, don't even bother, it's not going to happen. So that was the sort of foundation that I came from. But I think the reason the book was super important for me, I remember, so during my gap year, I worked at an incredible organisation called Big Change, and I worked within the Virgin Group for about a year. And whilst I was there, I was around the table with a couple of friends and colleagues, and we were talking about stop and search, because it was super topical in the news at that time. It's always super topical, like every year or every couple of years. So I'm there literally sharing my experiences, saying, I've been stopped and searched this many times. It's humiliating. I sort of mention the way that I feel. But the way I'm explaining it, I'm just explaining it normally. Like, if me and my friends would have been talking about it, we would have been laughing about certain things. There was even a game we used to play where if we were in someone's car and we passed like a police van on the other side, we would literally count the amount of seconds and see if they would actually like turn around and stop us. Certain times they wouldn't, but certain times they actually would.
Wow.
So me and my friends, we would joke about it a lot. But around the table, when I'm speaking about it, no one's like laughing or like smiling, or like everyone's looking at me in a certain way, and I'm thinking, did I say something? Like, did I offend you? So I remember I shared an example of a period of time. I think I was in 10 Downing Street receiving an award from the Prime Minister called the Points of Light Award. I think I received it when I was like 15. And we had a reception, we switched on the Christmas lights in Downing Street. So I'm there with like David Cameron, MPs, decision makers. A couple of days later, I'm in Brixton. I get put in the back of a police van because, again, I fit a description. And then I've got like half like strip search.
Wow.
So I remember like sharing that, but everyone's like, what? Like, what the hell? Like, that's not right. So I think at that moment for me, I realised two things. Number one, I was so desensitized. Like, I was so desensitized that I didn't realise that as a kid growing up, I should never have had some of the experiences that I had. you know, that conversation I was having was the tip of the iceberg. But when I started thinking about more serious things that me and my friends were affected by, I was like, wow, maybe this isn't right. Do you know what I mean? And I think the second thing was the realization that my reality and my everyday, something that is so normal to me, could be seen as a complete nightmare to someone else. And that was the thing that hit me the most, that something that is so normal, not only for me, but for hundreds of thousands of people across the UK, can be seen as a complete, terrible sort of like nightmare. So that was the foundation of the book, and that was, you know, where the title Dreaming in the Nightmare came from, but also recognizing, you know, my reality may be seen as nightmare, but everyone has their own sort of like nightmare in a way. You know, I remember meeting a couple who was super, super wealthy, and they were telling me the story of one of their friends who was sort of lashing out on them because he was going through a few issues at home. And he was sort of saying like, you know, oh, you lot have it all, like you're doing so well, like I have all of this stress. And, you know, they turned around to him and said, you know, well, we haven't been able to bear kids, and that to us would be everything. And, you know, he was sort of complaining about his current home situation, and he was on the brink of divorce with his wife and stuff with his kids. So that was their own reality, that is someone else's nightmare. Or I remember going to Senegal. I worked with an incredible organisation called to.org. And, you know, we went over there. We went to like loads of different community projects and charities. And on one of the days of the trip, I didn't actually go down, but some of the people on the trip went down to like almost like a landfill. And, you know, you're seeing all of this plastic from the West. You're picking it up. You're seeing something that's made in the UK in a landfill in Senegal. Like, it's just crazy. But then you had a mother with her like 9-month-old baby on her back, carrying her around, picking up recycled materials to go and upcycle to make some money. That was her reality. She had a smile on her face. But to anyone else, including myself, you know, maybe I've been through what I've been through, but that to me is a complete nightmare. So I think for me, it was just saying, you know, not saying that growing up in Branson was a nightmare, not saying that certain environments are a nightmare, but it's more the realization that anyone's reality could be seen as a complete nightmare to someone else.
Wow, what an incredible story, and thank you so much for sharing that.
No worries.
I mean, it's so interesting to hear that. I think you know, one of the things that really makes me think about is it's why it's so important that we all see each other as human beings and have empathy for each other, because even though relatively or comparatively, actually someone, you know, if you're going to weigh things up, is in a, you know, a safer environment, better environment, however you want to term it, but, you know, to live is suffering, right? And everyone's going through that own journey, and you know, everyone's going through things that they're really, really struggling with. And you know, amazing to hear the perspective that you've got, and, you know, traveling and seeing that in such like drastic terms, you know, the difference there. And in terms of that process of like unpacking all the things that you'd been through, was that a therapeutic process of writing the book?
Yeah, it was really traumatic at times. And I've shared that a lot in a lot of interviews, because you're sort of uncovering a lot of stuff that has been buried in your heart, in your mind. You know, you're thinking back, and there were so many things I even forgot about. But I had to, you know, I had to say to myself, I'm writing a memoir, you know, this is about my life. Let me think back to everything that I've been through. But I started uncovering so much. I think another part of it for me that was super interesting was that I felt like I got to know my mom for the first time. And I feel it's something people take for granted. It's like you have to almost ask yourself, do you really know that person, even though you're close to them?
It's interesting.
So I remember sitting down with my mom in one of the chapters called Home, and learning about her reasons for coming over to the UK. She was like a highly qualified lawyer. She came from a middle-class background. When she was growing up, her family had a driver. She went to private school in Nigeria. But her reasoning for actually moving to the UK was more because she had gone through a traumatic experience that I had no clue. I had no clue that ever happened to her. But she went through a really traumatic experience and felt she had to leave to go somewhere new. And she came over to the UK. So even that for me, you know, especially when you think about migration, you think about people moving to other countries, a lot of the time it's like, cool, people are going to move to find better opportunities. But in her case, it was more because she had experienced something dreadful and felt like she had to leave her current environment. And then even just learning how she felt when she got here, because, again, she was highly qualified, but her qualifications meant nothing. Nigeria used to be a colony, like all of the law is basically English law. But it wasn't a thing where she could literally just convert that and continue her practice.
Really, even though it's the same law?
Yeah, pretty much, like literally pretty much. Obviously, different countries, so slightly different. But again, you know, she's had to come and then basically start from scratch. So even just delving into that, I think for me, not only did I recognize her resilience and just how hard she worked, but I felt I truly got to actually know who she was for the first time in my life, 19 years after she gave birth to me. So yeah, that was incredible. But yeah, there was a lot of trauma. There was a lot of like dark days where I had to sort of really dig deep. And a lot of vulnerability. Like, I was super anxious when the book was about to come out.
Terrifying. I can only imagine. Like,
so
putting that out there,
because it's like the way I see the book. Like, if you read the book, you know who I am, and I was saying to myself, do I want thousands of people to know who I am?
Especially when you don't know who they are. Right?
Exactly.
It's pretty unbalanced.
Exactly. Because I was totally unfiltered.
Yeah.
I was very vulnerable. I really opened up about a lot. So yeah, a lot to dig into, and it was a very sort of like deep period of time.
At what point did you feel validated that it was the right thing to release, being like, okay, because at that point it feels like a risk, right? Like, am I gonna, you know, harm opportunity by talking about some of these things?
Yeah.
Was there ever a point actually where it got to, it was like, okay, that was the right thing to do?
Definitely. I think the reaction of the book, you know, I had people that had never read a book in their lives sort of saying, you know, I picked up the book. Some of them, to be fair, said, you know, I don't read, but I got the audio book. But, you know, it was just seeing the reaction and the impact that it had. And I think it was important because it wasn't my story alone. You know, so many people could actually relate to a lot of the things that I was talking about. So I think for me, when I knew, you know, this was the right thing to do, was really seeing the reaction, really seeing the impact, receiving like all of the messages, and just seeing how it literally impacted so many lives around me.
Amazing. Okay, so when I looked, as I said to you before, I looked at your LinkedIn, it's like just blows me away, honestly, and see some incredible names in there, people that you've worked with. See Richard Branson's name, see Bill Gates' name. I mean, tell us about some of those experiences and what did you learn there?
Yeah, so I've had some incredible experiences along the way. I've met some incredible people. As mentioned earlier, I was a youth ambassador at an amazing, incredible charity called Big Change, which was founded by Sam and Holly Branson. And it's all around education. You know, when I first got involved, it was all around, you know, how can we get young people to not just study for exams, but to actually thrive in education. And that was super important to me because I felt growing up that I never had sort of like a curriculum that prepared me for life. But yeah, during that experience, I went on incredible journeys. I participated in something called the Virgin Strive Challenge, a super like sort of like endurance sort of like event.
What is it?
So essentially, to raise money for Big Change, you know, a group of incredible individuals come together and go away, and they participate in a number of different activities, from cycling to hiking to kayaking. In certain Strive challenges, there's been swimming, but it's sort of there to like push you to your limit. So the first one I went on was in Morocco. I was really saddened about everything that happened in Morocco recently, because I felt like I connected with the place in such an amazing way. And, you know, even when everything happened, I felt that I had to make some sort of response. And we're working with a few charities at the moment. But yeah, we essentially done like a crazy like walk and went through the Atlas Mountains.
Wow, incredible. Sounds amazing.
And yeah, an incredible group of people. You know, you had Richard, and then you've got Sarah Blakely, you've got Simon Sinek. We were around some incredible people. I think on that journey, you know, I had the opportunity to speak when we were sort of like at the base camp. And the one thing I touched on was reaching your full potential. And I sort of stood up in front of everyone, and I said to them that in my life, you know, I feel like I've only achieved 3% of my full potential. Hopefully it's a little bit more than that now, but, you know, 19-year-old Jeremiah, I've achieved 3%. And I sort of said to everyone in the room, you know, you've achieved incredible feats, but you haven't necessarily reached your full potential. Like, no matter where you are currently in life, no matter how successful, you know, your companies are, everyone has more to give. So that to me was really important to say at that time. But yeah, incredible experience working with Big Change. Again, super close to my heart. I've worked closely with the Gates Foundation as a goalkeeper and ambassador on a program called Goalkeepers. And that's incredible, just doing a lot of work around sustainable development goals. And that's been incredible. And yeah, like I've sort of learnt to, alongside my entrepreneurship, to also think about charity. And I think it's super important. And for me, I just can't function if something I'm working on doesn't include helping other people. Like, I just can't, or helping the planet. So for me, you know, I've been fortunate enough through actually living life that way that I've met some incredible, highly accomplished people. And a lot of people always say to me, oh my God, like, I see you with this person or that person. But the number one thing that I've learned is, you know, everyone's like a human being. And I feel sometimes in celebrity culture or fame culture, whatever you want to call it, sometimes we believe some of those individuals are superhuman. But the one thing that I've learned around being around certain individuals is they're just like you and me. Like, they're normal people, they have a normal life, they have a normal family. And, you know, don't feel that people are sort of like out of reach and they're like just totally not in reach of whatever you're doing. Like, that whole 2 degrees of separation thing. I remember how I got involved in the Gates Foundation was through something that I'd done 7 years before.
Okay.
But someone who was working with them remembered me and sort of got me to come along to a focus group they were doing with some activists and some entrepreneurs. And then I was invited to go to New York to attend Goalkeepers and have like a private dinner with Bill that was like hosted by Mike Bloomberg, but there was just crazy people around the table.
That's a pretty crazy sentence to be able to say.
yeah. But that wouldn't have happened if I didn't meet that individual like a couple years before. It's the same thing I was even saying about opportunities.
Exactly.
Like, you need to put yourself in a position for the opportunities to come to you. But yeah, I just feel like, again, if someone wants to get to the Prime Minister or someone wants to get to a CEO of a massive company, they're not that hard to get hold of. Like, they may be in a sense, but again, you're not far off from actually connecting with some of these individuals. Like, even my first business was a youth consultancy agency. So we'll go into brands and advise them on connecting with Gen Z audiences, focus groups, youth councils we would set up. How I set up that business, I emailed 400 CEOs of FTSE 100 companies. I want you to guess how many responses I received.
My guess would be like 15%.
Okay, so I received 0 responses.
Wow, okay.
So I remember after that happened, I sat down with one of my boys, Daryl, and he sort of said to me, Jeremiah, like, you've done this, you've been in Down Street, like, you've been around, you set up this at a young age. I think it was like the 2 days before my 17th birthday. So having that conversation, and he literally said to me, if you continue emailing, it's going to be yes or no. So think about it as a 50% chance. But if you stop emailing, it's going to be 0%. So literally, like, I kid you not, the next day I emailed Warren East, the CEO of Rolls-Royce. I believe he's still there. So I emailed him sort of saying, I'm Jeremiah, I set up something called the Radio 1 Youth Council. These are the services that I'm offering to businesses, and I would love to explore how to sort of work with Rolls-Royce. And the guy replied to me the next day, like, I kid you not. So yeah, again, just, I don't want to go down a mad tangent, but
No, not at all.
yeah, again, it's just about understanding that a lot of these people are human.
Yeah.
A lot of these people aren't receiving a million emails a day. Not saying they're busy, but you'll be surprised. I remember seeing an interview with Mark Cuban, just saying a lot of people think I wouldn't reply to emails, but I replied to random emails sometimes.
Yeah.
So,
And I think it's also an amazing lesson that perseverance is key as well, right? A lot of people send the first 25 emails, get nowhere, and they're like, right, this isn't going to work. So I think it's such an important lesson for everyone is, no one got anywhere by giving up, right? You've got to keep on pushing that.
1,000,000%.
You mentioned your entrepreneurship before, so tell us a little bit about RAFFL.
Cool. So RAFFL, Real Authentic Fans for Life. Our sort of like nickname is Pokemon Go for brands.
Okay.
So again, I worked with so many different companies saying, what should we do on marketing campaigns? And I felt like a lot of the companies I worked with were getting it wrong. You've got social media marketing, and there's super low engagement rates. I came across a shocking stat, I think yesterday, and it said that 99% of Gen Z would skip an ad if they had an option to skip it. And I was like, what, 99%? So it's like social media doesn't necessarily always work or have that impact. There's something called influencer fatigue. Out of home is super like difficult to track. You can say this amount of people are going to pass this billboard every day, but how many of them actually interact with it? And like stuff like radio and TV, it's all the same. There's a massive decline. So I wanted to create something that I've called sort of like gamified marketing. And I wanted to find a way to extend these campaigns, but bring them to life in the real world. So I thought augmented reality, a tool that is actively out there. It's had its hype. Certain people might say it's died down. You saw the whole metaverse thing.
Once Apple released that headwear, though, that's going to change drastically.
People started talking about it again. But for me, it was, how can I actually extend the campaigns and bring them to life in the real world? And what actually brought all of my thinking together was drop culture. So you look at brands like Supreme, who created this crazy sort of fan culture in which, they've created scarcity in order to, sort of artificially create demand. And you've got brands like Cortez, which I'm sure you're familiar with, and you see what Clint is sort of doing. And I sort of said, this is all experiential marketing. I want to create a tech platform that can embody this and that can sort of extend all of these campaigns. So yeah, in the name Pokemon Go for Brands, we essentially put on activations outdoors where people sort of run around globally. They interact with AR sort of 3D models, and if they are successful in capturing them, they receive some sort of reward or prize from the brand that they're interacting with. Very cool. So we're sort of tackling, number one, vouchers, and we're tackling competitions. So you see a competition like Molly May on Instagram. She had like 3 million entries, got in tons of trouble.
Yeah, I remember.
So my whole thing is there's thousands of Instagram competitions every day, but what if you turn that into working with a creator, getting people to actually actively leave their houses and go outdoors to actually engage with the brand? because that now increases that engagement rate to 100%. Like, if people are willing to get out of their bed on Saturday morning to engage with you. Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing. And the second thing is we're building something super, super special. Think augmented reality Groupon. But essentially, we are working with retailers to figure out how people can sort of redeem rewards and sort of like take them in store to sort of redeem. So rather than the one-off activations, let's say, I don't know, Arsenal FC, we're going to give away signed jerseys or hospitality tickets. So rather than doing like the odd activation, we sort of want to create an environment where every day, as people are navigating, they can sort of interact with brands, redeem vouchers, go to the till, sort of like scan your barcode and receive discounts and stuff.
Very cool. I'm super excited to see that. Yeah,
thank you,
amazing. And are you doing that as a solo founder? You got a co-founder on that?
Solo.
How are you finding that journey?
It's been interesting, but I have like an amazing team around us. My co-founder that was involved had to step back due to like unforeseen like family circumstances.
These things happen.
It was a bit unfortunate. But it's been an incredible journey so far. You know, we're still early, but again, we've gained a lot of traction. Just because, again, the whole opportunity thing, meeting people in the past, making sure that what I'm doing now aligns with what they're doing. But yeah, we're looking to launch in Q1 next year. But sort of between now and then, we'll be doing like loads of fun and cool sort of like activations. So
amazing. I'm excited to see it.
Thank you.
Jeremiah, I've got a few questions for you to ask everyone. So my first question for you is, what is the single biggest risk you've ever taken and what was the outcome?
Okay, so seeing as we're sort of in the city, I think I can like his office is sort of behind there, but essentially I was sitting in the back of a classroom in college, and a guy walked in with the assistant principal. It was like an empty classroom, just me and like my two like favorite teachers, Miss Borland and Miss Henry. Like I didn't even study their subject, but they would always like give me space and stuff. Like, incredible woman. So yeah, a guy walked in with the assistant head teacher, and he was looking trim, nice suit. I was thinking, this guy ain't a teacher. But I was sort of overhearing them, and the assistant head teacher was saying, this is Maduka. He is a former student. He grew up in the area. Now he's grown a massive recruitment firm in the city. So I remember hearing it, and then he left the room. And then I went up to Miss Borland and Miss Henry, sort of saying, I wish that I spoke to that guy. I wish I actually like engaged in a conversation. It was super interesting. And then they were like, Jeremiah, you should have spoken to him, whatever. So that was like the last stop of the tour that he was having. And as we were speaking, I heard like a roaring sort of like engine outside the window. And when we looked outside the window, it was like this nice like Maserati, and he was driving out. So I was like, nah, I'm not letting this go. So I ran out of the classroom, ran through the corridor, down the stairs, ran through like the reception. The receptionists were looking at me, so I nearly got in trouble. Ran outside, and then he was sort of like leaving, and I jumped in front of his car.
Amazing.
And it was just something in the moment. I was like, no, I'm not letting this guy go. So when I jumped in front of his car, it wasn't as dramatic as that. Like, I didn't get run over, but it was more just literally rushing in front of his car and just asked him for a minute. And I went to the window, and then I immediately introed myself. I said, I'm Jeremiah. I've been involved in youth politics. I'm really interested in entrepreneurship, and I'm super inspired by your story. I would love to stay in touch. And then he was like, super impressed. He was like, this is like...
Love the pitch.
Yeah. He was like, take my email. Took his email. I emailed him. And, I think like a year later, I was working on a project, and we started building our relationship from then. So he used to have his offices in the Gherkin. I remember going there for the first time. Like, it was crazy. And and we just got to know each other and built like a really strong relationship, and he became a mentor. And then when I was like 17 or 18, he invested like 15K into like one of my projects I was working on. So that to me was like very sentimental, and it will always be in my heart, because I recognize if at that moment I didn't just click and I didn't go for him and to go and speak to him, not only would that be a relationship I never would have had, but it just goes to show that sometimes you have to do it in a moment.
Yeah. Life is full of these sliding door moments, and if you miss it, you never know where that could have led.
Exactly.
So it's super interesting, and thanks for sharing that as well. So now that you're, grand old age 24, and do you feel like there's pressure now, considering you are where you are and the opportunities that you've taken? Is it a constant case of, okay, I've got to take every opportunity? Are you now at a stage where it's like, okay, well, I need to actually prioritize because you can't take every opportunity? Like, how do you manage it at this stage?
So I feel over the years, there was a mixture of two things. The first thing was that I felt I had to do multiple things to bring in income. So again, the sort of like situation I was in growing up, my whole reasoning was, let me do a million different things that I'm interested in, and then whatever starts paying first.
Okay, nice.
So that was the first reason I had. I think the second thing was, after I sort of left that, I dropped a lot of the stuff I was doing, but I was still doing a lot. And I felt there was a bit of pressure, the fact that pretty much every single year since I was 11 years old, there's been something, like some sort of milestone or something that has happened. So like, it's so funny, like literally from 23 to 11, you're literally going to find a newspaper article of me from every single year. So I think for me, there was like this pressure, like, not in the vanity sense, more in the sense of I can't let everyone down. Like, what am I going to do next? So there was also that pressure I sort of had. But I think I'm in a place now where, number one, I've had to tone down a lot of the stuff that I was doing, however incredible they were. And I came to the realization, it's about just putting time into something. I've seen that with RAFFL. I literally put 18 months putting my head down, lost a lot of revenue streams, because I couldn't put my attention into other things, and I really had to make that sacrifice. So for me, it's actually starting to pay off now.
Yeah.
But again, it's like I really had to get to that point where I'm like, no, put your head down, focus on one thing. I think the other thing is, don't care about what other people think, because they're probably not even thinking it anyway.
Great
so
advice.
The example that I gave about the whole, I've got to do something every single year, I think I just said to myself, like, Jeremiah, just relax. You're 24 years old. I think that's even another thing. You think about age, and no matter how young you are, no matter how old you are, a lot of people think about age and, am I in the right place? Could I be further? Are there things that I've missed? And I feel for anyone watching this who is like maybe a teenager or a bit younger, don't rush. Don't feel like you have to rush. And maybe, your example of Instagram earlier was a bit of me. Like, I've never been a materialistic guy. I've never really cared about having particular things. But I maybe cared about being in a particular position. But again, you need to lay the foundations. You actually need to build towards it. You need to work hard. And I think I'm at a point where I've super realized it. So yeah, I've sort of like slowed down. I don't feel pressure. And this is the best space that I've ever been in my whole entire life. And it goes back to the mind, body and soul stuff. It goes back to the remaining focused. And it goes back to, again, not caring about other opinions. A lot of the times when we think about what other people are thinking of, they're probably not even thinking it in the first place. And even if they are, don't bother. Like, you don't need to get validation from anyone apart from yourself.
It's incredible advice. And you're right, everyone's so bogged down in what they're worried about for themselves. Like, it's, even if people are thinking something about you, it's a fleeting moment, right?
Yeah.
And we shouldn't be living our lives based on trying to live up to an expectation that may or may not exist on us. But it's tough, right? It is tough.
Yeah.
My next question for you is, what are you proudest of? And that's going to be a difficult question for you.
I think the thing that was an important moment for me was when Richard Branson basically like surprised my mom on FaceTime. Sorry.
All good.
Richard Branson basically surprised my mom on FaceTime. So to give context, as I was growing up, similar to a lot of people from like a West African household, I would say, my mom would literally use so many people as examples. So it could be the pastor's daughter, it could be the cousin who just graduated, it could be, this person's getting married, or this guy is now doing his masters. So my mom would always give examples, but one of the examples she would touch on a lot was like Richard Branson. She was like, look at Richard Branson, look at what he's been able to do with Virgin, you know. He's doing this, he's doing that. And she'll give examples of like loads of different people. So she was obviously aware around some of the work I was doing. But I just thought, as a kind gesture, what if I FaceTime her and then Richard's on the phone? So yeah, we made it happen. And she was like overjoyed. And, to have someone like him speak about me to my mom, that was like the proudest thing ever. And for me, it was just for her to understand that all of her hard work had sort of meant something, which I felt was super important. So that was a very like significant moment to me.
That's incredible. Yeah, I can only imagine how that felt, being able to, just be in that environment, and just, I can only imagine the look on your mum's face picking up FaceTime at that point. Incredible. Okay, my next question for you is, what does it take to be successful?
What does it take to be successful? I think that question can be answered in so many ways. I think number one, you can give business advice, you can say you need to do this or that, but I'm mind, body and soul. That's me right now. And I feel in order to be successful, that is like the foundation that you have to lay before thinking about a business idea, or if you're thinking of, if you have a startup and you're thinking about scaling up or raising, or if you want to go into a particular field. Before moving forward with any of that, you need to equally put in time and energy and work into those three areas. I think the second thing that is super important for me is the understanding that I'm thinking about the whole opportunity thing again, where it's like, you can't just wait, you can't just sit here and hope for the best. Like, you actually have to put in actions. Something that I always say during like public speaking is change is a word, but we need it to become an action. And what I mean by that is, we always talk about change. I want to have a change in my life, or I want to be successful, or I want to be this or that. But you can't just talk about change. Like, you have to change that word into an action. Like, you have to put in the actions to actually get to that point. And one thing I say to, like, I had a conversation yesterday with a young person that I mentor, and he said, I'm feeling a bit lost. And I said to him, number one, I've been in that place so many different times. But number two, let's lay everything out on the table. So we laid everything out on the table. And then I essentially said to him, before saying there's no opportunities out there, or before saying it's hard and that you can't be successful, you truly within yourself, you have to feel and you have to know that you have exhausted every single route possible to get into where you need to get to. And even with myself sometimes, have I truly exhausted every single possible angle? Have I truly put in all of the work that I know I need to put in? A lot of the time I haven't. So when we were having that discussion, I was sort of saying, he had a service that he wanted to give to businesses, and I said to him, okay, you already have your portfolio. What you need to do moving forward, you need to treat this as a 9 to 5. So what I mean by that is, in a week, even if you say Monday to Friday, from 9 a.m. in the morning, you're creating your pitches, you're creating your lead generation, you're creating your contact list, and from 9 to 5 every single day, you're literally emailing as many people as you can email every single day, 9 to 5. And I essentially said to him, cool, right now we're talking like this, and we're saying maybe there's not enough opportunities for you, the economy is the way it is, but if you have truly embodied all of that, if you have truly gone to your limit, and then at that point there's no opportunities, then maybe you're in the wrong space at that point.
Yeah.
But before you've actually gone to that point where you can say, all right, cool, yeah, Jeremiah, today I've emailed 30 people, I've reviewed all of these TikTok accounts, I feel I can do better, so I've created this short form content to pitch. Until you've truly exhausted every single angle, you cannot expect there not to be opportunities. Yeah. So again, to be truly successful, for anyone that wants to be successful, you have to give it your all. If that means you need to put your head down for 6 months, for 12 months, if that means you have to sacrifice certain things to put time into what you truly believe in, you have to make sure that you have truly given it your all until you're exhausted, until you feel like you can't even do any more. And with that resilience, you will definitely become a success.
It's incredible advice. And I think one of the really important things there, which I take from what you're saying, is you've also got to learn to not have fear of rejection.
Yeah.
Because you're going to get rejected
a million
lot,
percent,
right?
a million percent. Remember what I said, 40 emails. Mm-hmm. I didn't get a single response. Rejection will happen, and at the end of the day, what I say is business. Like, never take business personally,
right?
And like, don't get me wrong, there's actually been times I took business personal in the past, and it's just like, nah, like, just move on to the next thing.
Yeah.
If anything, the people you're pitching to are the ones that are missing out. So if there's rejection, next thing.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's also such great advice, because I see with a lot of founders, especially in the tech space, for example, is they'll want to do that head down 18 months just building the product, because they actually have that fear of saying, well, what if no one likes it? What if people don't respond? And, you should start putting it out there, trying to make opportunities happen day one. Even before the product's ready, start lining things up, right?
Day one, even if you can get a landing page up, even if you create a social media page and you're just putting out content to see how people react. But yeah, it's the same for founders. Like, I've learned a lot in this journey, because again, I've had businesses in the past, but I wouldn't call myself a founder in the way that people talk about founders. Like, this is the first time that, number one, I've gone into a space that was kind of new to me in terms of tech. And secondly, just understanding, the little things matter. So exactly what you just said, like, I think I had to get to a point where, rather than just building things and assuming things, I had to actually start building it alongside my potential clients. So it's just little things like that are super, super important.
Yeah, 100%. All right, my last question for you is, 15-year-old Jeremiah walks in the room right now. What are you going to tell him?
This is always a tough one. And I feel my answer changes every time I answer this question. To my 15-year-old self, I would say, live a little more. The one thing that I do regret, and I think we sort of touched on it, I can't remember if it was before we started or after, but I'll recap it. But essentially, the number one thing for me is, as I wanted to help so many other people, I didn't think about myself. And because of circumstances at home, because of circumstances within my environment and because of circumstances around all of the work that I was doing back then when I was young, I didn't necessarily have that teenagehood or that childhood that I really wanted. I felt like I skipped a couple of chapters, if that makes sense. So to my 15-year-old self, you know, a lot of the time you could say, yeah, work harder, find more opportunities, do this, do that. But I think it's really important to live a little, like take in the world around you when you're that age, and as you're growing older. And I feel, you know, this whole mindset that a lot of people have, you know, everything's segmented into blocks. You know, you've got your education, you've got secondary school, college, go to university if you want to go to university. Go and get a job after university if you want to get a job after university. And to my 15-year-old self, I would say just don't involve yourself in that process. Just do what you feel is right and live a little, because these years are precious, and you will never get them back. So live for yourself and live a little bit more.
Love that. Thank you so much. Roei, where can people find you?
You can find me at JE1BC on Instagram, the same on Twitter, I believe the same on TikTok, the same on LinkedIn, I think. And you can find out about RAFFL at RAFFL World, or www.raffleworld.com. And RAFFL is spelt RAFFL, so RAFFL without an E.
Amazing. We'll also have the links below.
Perfect, perfect.
Thank you so much for coming on. Really appreciate
it. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for watching the episode. And if you haven't subscribed, please hit subscribe below so that you can support the podcast and we can keep on bringing you amazing new guests. If you want to see the other amazing episodes in this podcast, click into our series section. As ever, if there are any other guests or topics you want us to explore, just let me know in the comments and we'll do our best to bring someone in.